today we have our star guest here, Nobel Prize laureate, Professor Dr. Joe Taylor, K1JT. Joe is here with us. It's always a little difficult to arrange for an according plan how to do things and so on. You know, Joe is a person who everyone wants to talk to, and for that reason, of course, we have to be so flexible. Joe, would you like to come to the stage here? Please give him a very warm applause.
Thank you all. And I really did not want to interrupt what the proceedings going on, and I know you want to hear Michael. I came to hear him as well. I wanted to say hello to everyone here, if I haven't already seen you. I think I don't have a prepared talk to give you at this time. Maybe some of you heard my talk already earlier this morning, and I need to, one of the reasons that we had to change the schedule is that I need to go down to the contest forum starting at about 1 o'clock to give another short presentation there. So clearly I'm very interested in the kinds of techniques and algorithms and so forth that you'll be discussing in these sessions. I did a lot of digital signal processing in my professional work in radio astronomy, and when I was phasing out my professional life, I spent some time in the university administration as a dean of the faculty, and sort of during that time I needed to have some way of getting out of the normal university politics and all that business, and realized that I should go back to my active hobby of ham radio, which I had put more or less on hold for about 35 years. I kept, during that time, I kept my code speed up and I got on the air every now and then, but I was not very active. But anyway, so some of the techniques that I used for discovering pulsars using radio telescopes turned out to be very applicable to signal processing in the ham radio domain, and clearly we were entering a time when signal processing in computers as opposed to analog circuitry was becoming a very attractive way of proceeding, and clearly that's going to be a big thing in our future. All of the major manufacturers of ham equipment these days are turning to more and more digitized signal processing in their insides. I might as well mention that a good deal of what I needed to learn starting out, for example, I was interested in making a digital protocol that would be useful for on the VHF bands for meteor scatter and then for moon bounce, EME. A good fraction of what I needed to learn starting out was provided by none other than Phil Karn, who happens to be sitting back here, KA9Q, who had already done quite a bit of thinking about signal processing and the appropriate error-correcting codes that would go into such a mode. So that kind of stuff was built into the very earliest versions of JT65. In fact, there are pieces of Phil's code which still exist in WSJTX. And Phil's paper with Tom Clark, about who at the time was W3, he's W3WI, I think now, is that right? K3IO, yeah. Anyway, and Tom Clark is another radio astronomer, so Tom Clark and I knew each other professionally, quite independent of our ham radio interests at that time. Phil and Tom got together in the late 1990s and wrote a paper called EME 2000 that had a lot of good fundamental information in it that got others of us started. So I'm going to leave you with just one other thought. That is that the current version of WSJTX, which implements this mode called FT8, which lots of people have had fun using, and which has taken off with worldwide popularity far beyond what we had ordinarily expected. That has been formulated, and the code is based on an assumption that we're using a standard amateur radio single sideband transceiver. So we're talking about bandwidths of a few kilohertz, typically 2.5 to 4 or 5 kilohertz is the maximum, and basically the input device is a ordinary sound card available in most computers. That clearly is a good place to start, but is not a good place to finish, and we'll be developing modes in future that allow much wider bandwidths, and for that we probably would not go to an audio signal and a single channel input, but rather use IQ signals and input complex data which can be used over a wider bandwidth. So that's clearly one of the futures that we want to be exploring. Currently, right now, our effort, having finished the FT8 mode and put it into a very good form, we have been developing a somewhat faster mode that runs in half the cycle time. Instead of 15-second transmit-receive sequences, it uses only 7.5 seconds, and it is attempted to be optimized for contesting, and that's why I'm going down to the contest forum in a few minutes to talk about that. So that's basically what's on the horizon at the moment. We may again think about very much more sensitive modes with slow transmissions and narrower bandwidths for use on the very long wavelength bands, the bands below the standard AM broadcast band, 630 meters and 2200 meters. For those bands, slower QSOs are perfectly acceptable. There are not that many stations available, but we'd like to be able to get down to signal levels of -30, -35 dB or so in the way that we have measured these things in a standard reference noise bandwidth of 2.5 kilohertz. So I just wanted to say hello and good morning, and I'm going to give it back to Michael in a minute, but I would be happy to respond to questions if you have a few on any topic that you might think I know anything about.
I think this is very important what you said about what your plans with WSJTX is now. And I think this is the right forum for it. If you are leaving the audio bandwidth, you must use SDR systems, are you?
Yes, absolutely.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That's nice for everybody in the room.
Question over here? Yeah.
Yeah, do you also see a future for weak signal modes and long correlation times for determining your own position relative to other stations? Just without using GPS, but just using HF signals.
Oh yeah, well that's certainly an interesting application. We haven't been thinking specifically of doing that in WSJTX. It's somewhat more specialized. We did try to implement some independent software, independent of WSJTX, just for doing that, using standard reference signals available on the air. But we haven't pursued that any further, and currently we have no plans, but maybe it would be an interesting thing to follow in the future. No doubt about it. Well, thank you all, and I think we should let Michael continue.
Ooh, it's up to you. We are very proud that you can have a talk here.
Questions?
Other questions? Okay.
Well,
I think we will have chances to talk individually during the remainder of the day, and I think you should carry on with what you had brought anyway to present to us. So
yeah, I have a question on the power levels which are used with FT8 and WSPR. WSPR,
yeah.
There's a regulation or a recommendation not to use more than 5 watts.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Because of the process gain of the system, we gain with 5 watts an SSB signal with 50 kilowatts.
Yeah. Well, most whisper signals, as you know, are low power, and that makes sense. But there are circumstances in which you might want to use whisper with much higher power. I think the rule of thumb should be what it is for all amateur radio communications. How much power should you use? Enough. Enough, whatever that is. Maybe it's a few watts, maybe it's milliwatts, and maybe it's a KW when you need it. I think For most circumstances with any of these digital modes implemented in WSJTX, the system is such that you either encode the message exactly as it was sent or you don't get anything at all. So as long as you're being copied, there's no reason to be loud. And it's, you know, and you will be copied even with low power on the HF bands as long as you have a clear frequency. And I think you know, we should all just use enough power, but don't use more than is necessary.
May I have another question?
Please.
You know that the WSPR.org is driven by W1 Bravo Whiskey, Bruce Walker.
Yes.
And well, there is, maybe it should be a question for Bruce, but I think it's a good idea to have an application program interface to the database to add on some more analyzer system, as I will talk in the afternoon about.
I think that's a good point, Michael, and I think the current, I have made good use of the WhisperNet database. But the only way you can use it at present is by downloading the whole thing. You download for a month, I guess it is, right? And then you can do whatever you like in your own computer. If there were a more flexible interface to the database, that would certainly be appreciated and be widely used. Bruce Walker, Whiskey 1 Bravo Whiskey, was responsible for getting the whispernet.org site started at first, and put a lot of effort into it, but he's unlike me. He's not retired. Bruce is very busy, and it's very hard to get his attention these days. Even if you have a simple email request to, you know, fix my login that doesn't recognize my password or something, it may take a month to get an answer. Eventually, you get an answer, and fairly recently, maybe 6 months or a year ago, he actually got some additional people together to form some sort of a committee that responds to email, but I don't think it is working all that well. I think people still complain. And of course, when they complain and can't get through, then they write to me, which I can't help them because I don't run the site. I don't have anything to do with the site. So although I worked with Bruce when he was getting it set up, I'm no longer a part of that. It's a very useful facility, but it currently you have to be patient in order to make good communication with them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, just to make it clear, I like this page, this WSPR.net.org. It is a very famous and a very well evaluated system, and I use this monthly reports every time. Yeah,
the same way that I do. Yeah.
It's very important to have it. Do you see any similar system for FT8?
Well, the similar system for FT8 is PSK Reporter, and
but it is limited to 1 day look behind.
I think it's 1 week.
Yeah, one week if you want to have a
he does not
summary.
He does not maintain a long-term database, and I think the reason is because the data rate is way too high. He has billions of QSOs. I mean, you know, you look at the little counter at the bottom of his screen. You know, it's turning over rapidly. I don't know. I mean, he privately funds the website and the servers that run it. And I think he just can't handle that amount of data, so he dumps it after 1 week. He does not maintain a long-term database.
Well, my question was because I'm responsible together with a group. We have since a year in the South Pole region a whisper station at first, and now an FT8 receiver, just looking in parallel on 8 bands.
Yeah, good.
And this is quite a good idea to have the statistic. And for scientific reports, we are responsible to get it out.
I wonder if there's some way that you could extract the data from the last few days and keep it in your own database, because at least that's possible.
I changed the software a little bit.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for a brief time to chat with you, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you when you continue.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.